027 local time, northern Crimea. The S-400 Triumf battery, deployed 3 kilometers northeast of Dzhankoy, had been active for 11 hours. Its 92 N6E engagement radar was painting tracks across the Sea of Azov. Ukrainian aircraft ingressing from the northeast, ADAXM's launch signatures climbing out of Zaporizhia, a constellation of electronic signatures that the battery commander had cataloged into a priority list. The radar was rotating. The Pantsir S1 short-range screen was alert. The 96L6 acquisition radar was scanning a 360-degree hemisphere out to 300 kilometers. And the command vehicle, buried under camouflage nets in a shallow depression east of the highway, had logged 17 intercept-ready solutions in the last 4 hours without firing a single missile. From the ground, this looked like dominance. A $1.2 billion strategic air defense system, fully integrated, layered, electronically shielded, controlling the sky over one of the most contested corridors in the southern theater. The battery crew believed they were untouchable. They had the Pantsir umbrella for close-in threats. They had electronic warfare coverage, blanketing the approach vectors. They had a command link running back to Russian Southern Military District headquarters, updating their threat picture in real time. From above, the picture was completely different. 48 hours earlier, a Ukrainian high-altitude reconnaissance UAV had found this battery. And since that moment, the S-400 had not been defending the sky. It had been building its own kill folder. Mara retention taunt point. 0. 30-hook resolution. Tease every radar rotation was a signature. Every time the 92 N6E swept its beam across the Azov littoral, it produced an emissions profile that Ukrainian ELINT collection. Airborne, ground-based, and fed by a NATO-ISR architecture overhead, had been logging, correlating, and geolocating to within 20 meters. The S-400 thought it was hunting. It did not know it had already been found. Within 11 minutes of the first Ukrainian strike cue, it would cease to exist. This is how Ukraine dismantled Russia's most expensive air defense system in the south. Not with an air campaign, not with F-16s punching through the radar envelope, with a $168,000 rocket, 4 HIMARS launchers, and a kill chain that had been running silently for 2 full days before a single round was fired. The asymmetry is the whole story. A system that took Russia 2 decades to field, costs roughly $300 million per battery, brought down by rockets that cost less than a mid-range SUV each. That gap between what Russia invested to control the southern sky and what we spent to erase that control defines the doctrinal logic of this war in 2026. Retention taunt point 4. 0-0 stakes bend. To understand what happened near Dzhankoy, you have to understand what the S-400 Triumph is actually for. Russia designed it as a strategic denial platform, not a battlefield air defense tool in the traditional sense, but a wide-area shield, capable of holding entire air forces at risk from distances up to 400 kilometers for the longest-range missiles. The 92 N6E engagement radar has a detection range against fighter-sized targets of roughly 300 kilometers, a tracking capacity of 300 simultaneous objects, and the ability to engage up to 36 targets concurrently with 72 missiles in flight at once. The battery near Dzhankoy was a fully equipped variant. 2 or 3 transporter erector launchers, each carrying 4 ready 48 N6 series missiles, the 96L6 all-altitude acquisition radar, the 92 N6E fire control radar, the 55K60 command post, and a Pantsir S1 gun missile system positioned to handle anything that leaked through the outer engagement layer. On paper, this system can deny Ukrainian air operations across a corridor stretching from the Crimean coast well into Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. For most of 2024 and early 2025, the S-400 network over Crimea did exactly that. Ukrainian F-16s flew carefully planned routes to avoid engagement envelopes. ATACMS strikes were routed through specific azimuth corridors where radar geometry was least favorable. The S-400 was not just a weapon system, it was terrain. It shaped Ukrainian operational planning the way a mountain range shapes ground maneuver. What Russia failed to account for was the intelligence architecture building around these batteries. Here is what most people assume about long-range air defense. The threat goes both ways equally. The evidence from the last 18 months tells a different story. Every time an S-400 activates its radar to track threats, it generates an emissions fingerprint that is as identifiable and geolocatable as a radio broadcast. ELINT platforms, airborne collection aircraft operating from NATO territory, signals intelligence from partner nations, Ukrainian ground-based systems near the contact line, can hear the S-400 the moment it turns on. The battery does not need to fire a missile to reveal its position. It reveals its position every time it does its job. Ukrainian GER, military intelligence, had been building a target folder on this particular battery for 48 hours. The folder contained not just grid coordinates, but a pattern of life analysis, shift change times, radar rotation cycles, the geometry of the Pantsir S-1 coverage arcs relative to the main radar, the locations of the generator vehicles, the access road used by resupply trucks. One detail in that folder, the positioning of the 96L6 acquisition radar relative to the command post, became the targeting anchor for the entire strike sequence. Retention chomp point, 50% mid-roll hook. The strike package that GER and the 19th Missile Brigade assembled was not a single HIMARS salvo. It was a sequenced saturation operation built around a specific doctrinal problem, the Pantsir S-1. A Pantsir S-1 is a capable close-in interceptor. It carries 1257 E-6 surface-to-air missiles and two 30mm autocannon systems, engages targets from 20 meters to 15 kilometers altitude, and is specifically designed to catch the kinds of low-flying subsonic munitions that might be used against an S-400 battery. In Russian doctrine, the Pantsir covers the S-400's blind spots and defeats saturation attacks that a single vector strike might attempt. The two systems together were designed to be mutually reinforcing. The Pantsir handles what the S-400 cannot engage at close range, and the S-400 keeps standoff platforms far enough away that the Pantsir never gets overwhelmed. Ukraine's targeting team had studied this pairing, and they had found the Pantsir's operational constraint. It carries a finite ready missile load, 12 missiles per battery. Under sustained small target saturation, those 12 rounds deplete. Reload is not instantaneous. When the Pantsir's ready load drops below combat threshold, the S-400's close-in defense layer collapses. The opening phase used Ukrainian UJ-22 and Shark reconnaissance UAVs, supplemented by modified Baba Yaga-class multi-rotor systems rigged as decoys, cheap enough to expend, radar cross-section large enough to force Pantsir engagement. Starting at approximately row 140 local time, waves of these systems approached the battery from two directions simultaneously. The Pantsir crew did exactly what they were trained to do. They engaged. This is the part that doesn't seem to make sense. Why send cheap drones against a multi-million ruble short-range air defense system? That is precisely the point. The drones were not trying to destroy the Pantsir. They were trying to empty it. Across a 47-minute window, the Pantsir fired repeatedly at successive drone waves. Ukrainian ELINT tracked every engagement event. By Zo2.14, intercept data indicated the Pantsir battery had exhausted the majority of its ready load. The S-400's close-in shield had been burned down, not by a peer weapon, but by systems costing a fraction of 1% of what they forced the defender to expend. At 02:17, the targeting trigger was sent. 4 HIMARS M42 launchers, positioned at dispersed firing points between 140 and 165 kilometers from the target, received simultaneous fire missions. Each was loaded with GMLRS-ER, the extended-range variant of the guided multiple-launch rocket system munition, with a published range of approximately 150 kilometers and a GPS inertial guidance package capable of sub-meter accuracy against fixed targets. 4 launchers, 4 rockets each, 16 rounds total, sequenced across 3 separate azimuth corridors to complicate simultaneous track and intercept. The 92N6E radar had been detecting incoming signatures within 30 seconds of launch. What the battery crew faced was a calculation with no good answer. The Pantsir was degraded. The S-400's own missiles could theoretically engage GMLRS-ER. The system has a stated capability against ballistic and cruise targets, but engaging inbound rockets at close range, from multiple bearings, with a depleted local defense screen, is not a scenario the system was optimized for. The command post logged the inbounds. They had less than 3 minutes. Russian milbloggers and Ukrainian OSINT sources later pieced together sequence from thermal satellite imagery, signals intercept, and footage from a Ukrainian surveillance drone that had been maintaining standoff observation of the battery throughout the night. The first GMLRS-ER rounds arrived at the 92N6E engagement radar site. The radar vehicle was not a hardened structure. It was a wheeled platform carrying precision electronics and a rotating antenna array. The blast and fragmentation effect of a 90-kilogram unitary warhead at sub-meter CEP against an unhardened electronic system is not survivable. The 92N6E burned first. 11 seconds later, the second wave reached the 96L6 acquisition radar. The acquisition radar going down mattered beyond just removing a sensor. It was the system's long-range eyes. Without it, any S-400 assets that survived the initial strike were operating blind, unable to cue missiles against incoming threats they could no longer classify or track. The third group of rounds hit the transporter erector launchers. The damage cascaded in a way the targeting team had anticipated, but could not fully model in advance. Each TEL was carrying live 48 N6 series missiles, rounds roughly 5 meters long, fueled armed with a 180-kilogram warhead, stored in launch canisters under pressure. When GMLRS-ER warheads impacted the first TEL, the resulting sympathetic detonation was not just a vehicle fire, it was a chain event. The stored missiles cooked off in sequence. The thermal and blast signature was visible on civilian weather satellite imagery the following morning, an anomalous heat source bright enough to register in the infrared channel. The fourth HIMARS package hit the command post vehicle and the generator array 30 seconds after the detonations. By that point, the battery no longer existed as a functional system. What remained was a debris field approximately 400 meters across, burning through the pre-dawn hours. Elapsed time from first GMLRS-ER impact to final detonation, 11 minutes. Put yourself in the position of the Russian Southern's military district commander receiving the battle damage assessment at 03 Plizo 0 local time. This was not a marginal loss. Russia fields fewer than 50 S-400 batteries in total across its entire military. Each battery represents years of production, years of crew training, and a replacement timeline measured in manufacturing capacity that the Russian defense industrial base under sanctions and wartime production stress cannot rapidly accelerate. One battery gone in 11 minutes is a gap in the Southern air defense architecture that cannot be plugged quickly. Ukrainian General Staff reporting, corroborated by satellite imagery analysis from multiple open-source monitoring organizations, confirmed the loss within 18 hours. Russian milbloggers, the informal military commentary ecosystem that has become one of the more revealing windows into Russian military morale and internal assessment, acknowledged the strike within 36 hours. The language was significant. Not the battery was damaged, or a Ukrainian strike was conducted, but explicit acknowledgement that a complete S-400 battery had been lost near. That kind of admission, from a community that routinely minimizes Russian losses, reflects a strike too visible and too costly to manage narratively. Intercepted communications in the hours after the strike, fragments shared by Ukrainian intelligence and referenced in a subsequent British Ministry of Defense operational update, indicated significant anxiety in Russian air, defense command structures in Crimea. The concern was not just the physical loss. It was the demonstration that the sensor architecture around the remaining batteries had been penetrated deeply enough to produce this kind of precision-sequenced attack. If Ukrainian ELINT and ISR could build a 48-hour target folder on one S-400 battery, the implication for every other active battery in the south was direct. Here is the take that will get pushback. Russia's decision to keep its remaining S-400 batteries radar active in Crimea is not a display of confidence. It is a sign of strategic desperation. The batteries have to stay active because the alternative is losing air awareness entirely. Without the S-400 radar picture, Russian air operations over the southern theater become significantly more constrained. But every hour those radars rotate, they are feeding the Ukrainian and NATO ISR architecture a fresh targeting update. Russia is caught between two losing options: run the radars and get found, or shut them down and lose the sky. What's most striking about this trajectory is not the individual strike, it's rate of attrition. Open source tracking of Russian strategic air defense losses since the beginning of 2025 shows a pattern that Russian doctrine never modeled for: consistent, repeatable, successful targeting of S-400 class systems by Ukrainian precision strike. Each confirmed loss is not just the system destroyed, but a doctrinal defeat. The S-400 was Russia's argument that Western air power could be held at risk from standoff distances. Ukraine is not Western air power. Ukraine is a ground force operating HIMARS, and it is dismantling the system that was supposed to make Russian air defense impenetrable. The battle damage assessment from the Dzhankoy strike extended beyond the physical equipment. With this battery gone, Russian air defense coverage over northern Crimea developed a significant gap in the medium to high altitude layer. Ukrainian ATACMS and Storm Shadow strikes into Crimea became operationally more viable within days. Ukrainian air planners, working with ISR data on the updated coverage geometry, adjusted ingress routes for F-16 operations to exploit the gap. The 11-minute strike did not just destroy a radar and some launchers. It changed the geometry of the air war over the southern theater. Subscribe to Fury Military so you don't miss how Russia is trying to adapt its air defense posture in Crimea, and why each adaptation is producing new vulnerabilities rather than closing the old ones. The doctrinal lesson is not subtle. Russia built the S-400 as a strategic denial system, a tool for keeping peer air forces at range, for controlling the electromagnetic environment over a contested region, for making the calculus of Western air intervention prohibitively costly. The system was designed against the threat of F-35s and B-2s and long-range cruise missile salvos from naval platforms. It was not designed against the specific combination Ukraine has developed: persistent ELINT collection, high-altitude reconnaissance UAVs operating at the edge of engagement envelopes, NATO-ISR integration, providing targeting quality intelligence, and a HIMARS fleet with extended-range munitions that can reach any point in Crimea from positions deep inside Ukrainian-controlled territory. One detail that stuck in the post-strike analysis: the GMLRS-ER rounds that hit the Dzhankoy battery flew approximately 150 kilometers from firing. Point to impact: the S-400's own primary missiles, the ones sitting on the tails when they detonated, have a range of roughly 250 kilometers. Russia had positioned a 250-kilometer reach weapon close enough to its own front lines that a 150-kilometer weapon could reach it. That is not a positioning error. That is a symptom of a strategic situation that has deteriorated to the point where there are no safe positions for critical systems. The math governing the southern theater is straightforward. Russia's inventory of S-400 batteries is finite and not rapidly replaceable. Ukraine's inventory of GMLRS-ER and ATACMS munitions, supported by continued Western supply, is sufficient to sustain this targeting campaign at current operational tempo. Each successful strike degrades Russian air defense density. Each degradation expands the operational freedom of Ukrainian aviation and long-range fires. The compounding effect of sustained attrition against a system that cannot be quickly reconstituted is not a tactical success. It is a strategic shift in the southern theater that will shape operations for the remainder of 2026 and into 2027. This is what sensor-driven warfare looks like, and why mass and cost alone no longer determine who controls the sky. One question keeps surfacing: how does Russia respond to a threat architecture it cannot outspend its way past? The GMLRS costs $168,000. The target it destroyed was worth $300 million. Russia cannot manufacture S-400 systems faster than Ukraine can find and fix them. The production math, under current sanctions pressure on Russian defense industrial capacity, does not favor reconstitution at the rate losses are occurring. But here is the forward question. Russian military planners are not static. They have moved batteries. They have attempted to reduce radar on time. They have positioned systems deeper, moved more frequently, changed mission schedules. The question is whether any of these adaptations can break the sensor-to-shooter loop Ukraine has built, or whether the loop is now too deeply integrated, too supported by the NATO-ISR architecture, to be defeated by repositioning alone. Comment below. Do you think Russia can adapt its air defense posture fast enough to stop this kind of strike, or has Ukraine already broken the calculus permanently? Will this targeting approach end the S-400 threat in Crimea within the next 6 months? Drop yes or no in the comments and tell us what you think Russia's next move is. Can traditional strategic air defense systems survive a battlefield where persistent ELINT collection and precision long-range fires make every active radar a targeting solution? That question is not hypothetical anymore. The Dzhankoy battery answered it, and every Russian air defense commander in the southern theater is now working with that answer. Retention chunk point. Last 60s payoff plus open loop close. The purpose of this analysis is not to glorify war, but to understand the military and human realities behind it, because the clearer we see modern conflict, the clearer the value of deterrence, stability, and peace becomes.